everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session. Before we begin the discussion, we want to briefly invite Brahim Fasifuri from the Amadeus Institute to the stage to make an announcement.
Thank you, Josh. Mesdames, Messieurs, j'aimerais profiter de cette cinquième et dernière séance plénière pour remettre le prix Business MEDays à Monsieur Karim Helal, ici présent. Si vous pouvez m'apporter le prix, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Well, welcome again to this now award-winning panel on the requirement of economic regulation, free trade or fair trade. We have a few issues that we're hoping to discuss today. These will include the current progress of international trade relations and the state, such that it is of the Doha Round. We want to talk about the shifting power dynamics in international trade talks between developed countries, rapidly developing countries, and least developing countries, and how their respective interests are changing. And finally, we most importantly want to talk about how to integrate concerns over issues like human rights, environmental regulations, and worker protections into the current international trade framework. And we've got a great panel here to talk to you today. These are people who are involved in international trade talks, both on a theoretical and on a practical level. And I think they should really be able to illuminate a lot of these issues for us today. Starting on the right, we have Jinhua, who's a special representative for African affairs from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Karim Helal, who's the chairman of the ASEAN-Egypt Business Association. Josep Piqué is chairman of Vueling Airline and the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain. And Raed Safadi is the deputy director of Trade and Agriculture at the directorate of the OECD. And just a few housekeeping notes before we start. Please silence your cell phones before we begin. And unfortunately, because of the short amount of time we have, I'm not going to be able to take questions, but we're going to try a little experiment. If you want to tweet a question using the hashtag MEDays, then I will try to take a few of them and pose your tweeted questions to our panel today. So I'm going to start for a question for the entire panel, and that is, it's been nearly 5 years since the breakdown of talks for the Doha Round. So do you see the Doha negotiations as dead? And if not, what are the main impediments towards restarting talks on forming a larger global trade architecture? We'll start with Mr. Zhong.
Thank you, Joshua. People talk much about the Doha Round for so long, and it's really a pity. And until now, we still haven't concluded this Doha Round negotiations for all the partners. But thank God that world trade is still going on, and even without the conclusion of this Doha Round, we still see a lot of development and increase of trade, particularly between emerging big economy and the developing country, south to south trade. I don't think the Doha Round is dead. It still can carry on and give us hope and the perspective for better conditions in the world trade in the future. But what we see is that we still need a lot of sincerity. I think it's unfortunate we come to the economic situation, particularly the financial situation, is not good. Make countries even difficult to make compromise. But I think at the end of the day, we still need to show our sincerity and willing to compromise to conclude this Doha Round. China is always have a constructive position in this negotiation, and we are open to any trial by other partners to push forward for the progress in this negotiation. But at the same time, we insist that the Doha Round should take the target as developing is the most important thing. If we can bring about development for the world, that is most important thing. And at the same time, very comprehensive consideration of the less developed countries' interest should be taken into a very important position during this negotiation. Their concern, their legitimate concern, should be always considered by all partners in that. Actually, when we think the eventual result of this Doha Round should bring the prosperity of the whole world, particularly those less developed countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Continue with you.
Thank you. I think the basic premise I would like to put forward is that without economic prosperity, political stability is at risk. And the world being a global marketplace as it is today, I do not think that we can afford to have political instability erupt anywhere in the world. Therefore, I do not believe that the Doha talks are at a dead end. I do, however, believe that they should take into account, as His Excellency the Ambassador just mentioned, the legitimate concerns of the less developed countries. Because, like it or not, the hot spots in the world tend to be in the less developed countries, mainly on the back of economic issues. Trade is extremely important, of course. From our point of view, as somebody coming from Egypt, which is a developing country with its, I would say, more than its fair share of challenges right now, trade is a catalyst for investment. And a robust trade eventually leads to investment, which in turn creates jobs, etc., etc. So I do think the trade talks should continue. They should be, I like the word sincere, they should be sincere in addressing the concerns, and they should try and move away from predominantly political agendas. I think that is very important. I also believe they should reflect the changing dynamics of world economy. The economic powers are shifting. We all know that. I do not think that the political scene has reflected that yet. And I believe if we can address these two issues, I think we will have the positive results that we are seeking.
Thank you. Monsieur Piqué?
Thank you very much. Our chairman, our moderator, said to me before starting this discussion in which language I will be more comfortable, if in Spanish, in English or in French. For me it's more or less exactly the same. So I'm very poor in the two languages. But the organization said to me that I can speak Spanish, and they are translating to me to Spanish. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm more comfortable, of course, speaking Spanish. Muy brevemente, yo creo que las conversaciones de Doha, que tienen ya muchos años, ¿no? Están influidas por algo que está transformando el mundo desde hace ya algo más de 20 años. Cuando acaba la Guerra Fría y cae el muro de Berlín, entramos en una nueva etapa geoestratégica. En aquel momento, muchos pensaron, Francis Fukuyama lo teorizó, que estábamos ante el fin de la historia y que los valores de Occidente, después de ganar la Guerra Fría, iban a expandirse por todo el mundo. Eso incluía el sistema parlamentario y democrático tal y como lo entendemos desde Occidente. Eso también comprendía las economías de mercado tal y como las entendemos desde Occidente, o la generalización, la extensión de los valores que conforman eso que llamamos la civilización occidental. La gran paradoja es que esa victoria de Occidente en la Guerra Fría genera unas dinámicas y libera unas energías en todo el mundo que hoy, curiosamente, esa victoria de Occidente está llevando a la aparición de poderes no occidentales en el mundo con una fuerza extraordinaria. Como diría un viejo marxista, está cambiando enormemente la correlación de fuerzas a nivel internacional. Y por lo tanto, las negociaciones comerciales tienen que responder también a esa transformación. Cuando después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, básicamente los países occidentales ponen en marcha el GATT, ¿no? El General Agreement for Trade and Tariffs, estábamos hablando de una problemática norte-norte y luego norte-sur. Yo creo que son conceptos que debemos olvidar ya para siempre. El centro de gravedad del planeta está yendo del norte hacia el sur y del oeste hacia el este. Y ese cambio en la correlación de fuerzas y en los equilibrios internacionales afecta también a las negociaciones comerciales. Nunca más vamos a poder hablar de la problemática norte-sur. Habrá que hablar de otras cosas, y estamos hablando de otras cosas. Ha cambiado el paradigma, y por lo tanto, como ha cambiado el paradigma, tenemos que abordar los problemas de una manera distinta a como las abordaban las generaciones anteriores.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. The world economy today, ladies and gentlemen, needs more trade, not less trade. Perhaps more than ever, it needs more of the trade, more of the investment in the wake of the financial and economic crisis that is still reverberating across the world economy. But also it needs better trade rules. Better trade rules to reflect all the changes, structural. We just heard a mention of the shifting wealth and shifting economic and other powers, if you will. But at the same time, there are structural changes that have been taking place within the international trade agenda, as reflected in the growing importance of services in trade, more tradability of services across border, more needs to be done in terms of trade facilitation, more needs to be done to reflect the fact that trade is not a zero-sum game. And as long as we view it as a zero-sum game, we will continue to have problems in multilateral trade diplomacy. Trade is a positive-sum game. You participate, you enhance your integration in the world economy through both exports and imports, then you have a better chance to grow, and then a better chance to actually attend to all the other problems, be they environmental, developmental, and what have you. In economics, we all know that you need one policy instrument to target one objective. We cannot mix things up. And if we mix things up in the sense that, within the Doha Development Agenda, you overwhelm the agenda with issues that transcend the trade policy per se issues, then we'll have a problem. So two problems that have arisen as of late, right? I mean, first, as I said, is that we're viewing more and more the trade policy or trade as a zero-sum game. What I win or what I gain is someone else's loss, which means, translated in other words, exports are good, imports are bad. But now, if you look at the world economy as it stands, trade is actually not taking place in finished goods, is in intermediate products, what we call trade in value-added terms, right? So look at the iPad that we have before us now. You'll know that it's coming out of China and it's recorded as China's exports, but actually for every $150 worth of exports of Apple products coming out of China, $4 only remain in China. The rest go all over the world. And that's the positive sum game that we're talking about. This is why you need to import in order to be able to export. And as long as you actually view the agenda, the trade agenda within that prism, then we can move forward. Else, we're going to be at loggerheads and we're going to be stuck in a stalemate. 11 years into the negotiations, 157 countries talking about issues going from intellectual property rights all the way to how you allow a lawyer to actually cross border and practice law within your own territory. So these are important issues. Let me reiterate that in today's world we need more trade, more investment, not less of either one.
Mr. Safadi, let me just stick with you for a minute. In my country, in the United States, we just, of course, concluded a presidential election where when trade came up, it was discussed, I would say, in the zero-sum manner that you're discussing. Both candidates repeatedly promised to, confront the Chinese government over its trade policies. President Obama's promised to double U.S. exports, though he, has been somewhat vague about how he plans to do this. I mean, do you think, looking beyond the United States, the developed countries in general, I mean, do you see a danger of a trade war as we recover from this recession and all countries try to boost their exports, or do you think that the trade architecture is such that that's not much of a concern?
Well, it is not much of a concern. We had the countries had every opportunity coming, from out of the financial crisis of 2008 and 9 to actually engage in a protectionist war. That did not happen, and that did not happen for a very simple reason, right? Because every country saw itself as part of a production chain. So, for example, when the tsunami last year struck in Japan, production actually was disrupted across all of Asia, not just in Japan, right? And therefore, this interconnectedness, once you recognize it, you know that any export promotion initiative or policy or drive is actually an import promotion at the same time. But politically, we call it export promotion because we think that, we're going to create jobs here. When you talk about an import promotion, it's like, you're talking politically nonsense in the sense that you see the jobs being sucked out of a national economy. And that's the jargon that we want to avoid, that it is we are interconnected. We need to actually work together. An export promotion policy, in my book, is an import promotion policy. So when China wants to increase its exports, it needs, by definition, to increase its imports. Otherwise, it will not be able to meet its target. The same goes for the United States or any other country.
Mr. Piqué, you had a response to that?
Sí, dos comentarios muy breves sobre algunas de las cosas que se acaban de decir. Uno terminológico, y me perdonará nuestro moderador. Yo creo que tenemos que ir cambiando algunos de nuestros términos, nuestra terminología. Porque vamos a ver, China es un país en vías de desarrollo, es la segunda economía del mundo. India es un país en vías de desarrollo. Indonesia es un país en vías de desarrollo. Probablemente tienen mucho que desarrollar todavía. Pero ya no creo que nos sea útil contraponer países desarrollados con países en vías de desarrollo. Estamos hablando de realidades distintas. Incluso estamos en un país que está al norte de África, que es un país mediterráneo, que es un país africano, que siempre ha mirado hacia el norte, como es Marruecos. Evidentemente, Marruecos se está desarrollando y está empezando a tener unas capacidades económicas que no había tenido nunca. Creo que tenemos que ser conscientes de una nueva realidad, y es cómo se está transformando el planeta, no solo en términos económicos, sino en términos geoestratégicos. El siglo XXI no va a tener nada que ver con lo que hemos visto en el siglo XX. Y el segundo comentario es que no podemos separar o abstraernos de las negociaciones en el ámbito comercial y de los equilibrios o desequilibrios en el ámbito comercial de los otros desequilibrios. Si un país tiene un fuerte superávit comercial, acumula normalmente un fuerte ahorro interno que sirve para financiar los desequilibrios de otros países. Y por lo tanto, uno de los problemas que tenemos en el planeta en su conjunto y que tiene Estados Unidos, que tiene mi país, que es España, es cómo absorbemos una acumulación muy fuerte de deuda durante muchos años financiada por ahorro externo. Y eso tiene que ver con las transacciones comerciales, tiene que ver con las transacciones financieras y tiene que ver con un elemento, y acabo, que pongo encima de la mesa porque hasta ahora no ha salido y me parece clave. Tiene que ver con los tipos de cambio.
Mr. Zhong, you focus on Chinese policy toward Africa. I'm wondering in this context, I mean, does the Chinese government going forward, and of course has its own leadership transition and process, I mean, do you still view China as a developing country, or are you, are you put in the place of competing with countries like the United States and Europe in terms of how you approach trade problems?
Thank you very much. I think to engage in the debate whether China is still a developing country will never bring any kind of conclusions at all. Different people have a lot of different ideas on that. But we regard ourselves, China, still as the developing country. Not because of the sheer volume of its own economy, because we are the biggest populated country in the world. So averagely, China is still pretty low. And also, with only a very short history of something around 30 years of development, the development itself is not very even. And east part, west part of China could be different, very different economically. So it's not only we be moderate, but it's also some kind of reality we have to face with. Otherwise, we probably lost our momentum of development. So Chinese leadership is always very cautious about how do we brand ourselves as a developed or developing country. But anyway, we need to still take this in mind that we do have a long way to go. Even if, considering all this volume of economy we are now having, and also about the software in China, about the mentality of the social structure, we do have a long way to go. That's the reason we still think we are a developing country. Thank you.
Mr. Helal, how has the rise of Asian economies affected the way Egypt views international trade? Do you see, are you orienting your trade policies more towards the East than you were before? And how is working with Asian economies different than previous experiences working with Europe and North America?
Well, Egypt, as many Arab countries, in fact, have been trained to look west. We've been traditionally attuned to look west, which we have been doing for the last 30, 40 years. Unfortunately, we did that at the expense of the potency and promise of the Asian economies. We have come in Egypt, we have come to realize this a few years ago only, and I say that with deep regret, even though Egypt was in fact the first country in Africa to recognize the People's Republic of China some more than 50 years ago. The reason is historical, cultural and what have you. But the point is, I believe that we have missed on a great opportunity to foster and deepen our relationship, economic ties with Asia. It is not too late, but we have wasted many, many years. We have started to do that in the past few years only. Now, the problem with that is doing business with Asian countries is quite different from dealing with the West. Not only because we as nations have been used to dealing with the West, so we, in a way, we understand a little bit how they function, how they think, and so on. The Asian way of doing business is quite different. Being Chinese, Singapore, Japan, and the rest. The culture is different. And therefore, when we started this, and I played a modest part in starting this initiative a few years ago, my starting point was to bridge the knowledge gap. There is a lot to be learned, both by us about how the culture works and how the culture is so important in conducting business, and also by letting the Asian economies, the Asian people, understand more about our part of the world, our potential, our investment possibilities, our trade needs, and so on. I have had experience in dealing with Chinese companies, Korean companies, and so on more than 30 years ago. And one thing I learned, they will not come into a new market or a new country until they have exhausted that country or that market by studies. They will study it to the last minute detail, no matter how long it will take. And once they have reached their conclusion, they come in. The point is, once they come in, unlike a lot of Western ventures, they are there for the long haul. They are long-term investors. And the other thing is, they will not come into a country where they are not made to feel completely welcomed. They are extremely sensitive to the host country. These are things that we need to understand to be able to take advantage of the potential and really benefit. And yes, it is quite different. It takes longer to develop, but the end result is certainly well worth it. And this is, all I can say is that we are now at the beginning of the road. We have had tremendous support, particularly from China, I have to say, after the revolution. I was part of President Morsi's business delegation that went to China a few months ago, and the reception was incredible. There is a national history memory. Chinese appreciate and remember that we were the first to acknowledge them. We kind of forgotten that. Now we are beginning to start to realize that we have a lot of goodwill in that place, and we need to take advantage of it for both our benefits. We're just starting to do that now.
Monsieur Piqué, how do you see the ongoing crisis in Europe affecting the way that governments approach trade? Do you think that there's still, with the level of high unemployment in the Eurozone, particularly in your country, do you think there's going to be an increased public backlash to trade and more protectionism, or are European governments still committed to a global free trade regime?
Aparte de hablar de la problemática de mi país y de la pregunta que me está haciendo, una reflexión previa, ¿no? Europa, el proyecto político europeo, está pasando por una crisis que no solo es la crisis económica que tenemos, sino que también es una crisis política, institucional y de confianza en nosotros mismos. Europa tiene que hacer un esfuerzo para ser percibida como una auténtica unión, como un proyecto político en sí mismo. Y una de las pocas cosas en las que Europa es percibida como una unión y habla con una sola voz es en la política comercial. Porque sí que es verdad que desde hace muchísimos años Somos una unión aduanera, somos un espacio de comercio común y eso parece irreversible. El principal problema de fondo, en mi opinión, que tiene Europa es que no avanza suficientemente en un proyecto de unificación política porque se ha encontrado con muchas dificultades para consolidar un proyecto previo, pero imprescindible, que es la unión monetaria. El nombre que le dimos los europeos a ese invento fue Unión Económica y Monetaria. Pero hemos construido una unión monetaria porque tenemos una moneda única, pero no hemos construido una unión económica porque hemos permitido demasiados desequilibrios entre los diferentes Estados miembros de esa unión monetaria. Y ahí llega una paradoja que responde a las circunstancias específicas de cada país, y es que teniendo la misma moneda y emitiendo la refinanciación de la deuda o la búsqueda de financiación con la misma moneda, unos países tenemos que pagar 600 puntos básicos más que otros, con la misma moneda. Por lo tanto, Europa tiene un problema de definición política que pasa por profundizar en la unión económica, sin la cual no es sostenible una unión monetaria a largo plazo. Y esa es la encrucijada en la que se encuentra Europa. Y si no somos capaces de resolver eso, ¿qué significa? Reducir los desequilibrios que todavía persisten después de los años de la bonanza, de los años de la euforia, de los años de las burbujas, ¿no? Si no somos capaces de reconducir esos desequilibrios con el esfuerzo de todos y desde el rigor y la disciplina que sin ninguna duda tenemos que desarrollar, yo le veo un futuro complicado a la propia moneda única y desde luego a las economías de cada uno de los Estados miembros. Nosotros tenemos un gravísimo problema de desempleo, pero probablemente en nuestro caso concreto no viene tanto de la crisis financiera y monetaria, sino de la especificidad de nuestro mercado de trabajo. Pero eso seguramente daría ya para otra sesión.
Mr. Safadi, are you worried about the increasing proliferation of bilateral trade agreements as opposed to large multilateral frameworks? Do you think that the increased number of bilateral deals we see, is that undermining the global trade architecture, or do you see the two as complementary?
Well, I mean, these are perception problems. Now, what has happened, 11 years of multilateral negotiations not leading to a deal of any sort. What happened? Countries, and behind those countries were economic interests, business interests, traders and investors, were pushing actually this regional approach to trade and investment. What is regional approach? In the sense that, what I just said about the trade in value added in terms of parts and components and intermediate goods. This is a reflection, a reality that has been taking place for the last 15 years. It's new. New in the sense that now companies actually go after tasks across the globe. Whoever can perform at the best quality, best price, the tasks, and they will assign it, whether it's in China, Singapore, Malaysia, and what have you, because the ease with which merchandise and goods and services have been moving through borders, right? And then multilateral negotiations are stalling, and therefore governments have been pushed to actually do regional deals. These regional deals, some of them actually are a substitute for a multilateral deal. They are, because of lack of progress at the multilateral agenda. I mean, for companies, the number one approach is a multilateral framework, so that they don't have to contend with bilateral rules of origin, right? So to be able to take advantage of any one regional agreement or bilateral treaty, they have to abide by certain rules of the game, which is called rules of origin. Now, if you have a multilateral deal, they don't need to actually have separate rules and separate treatments with different partners within a regional trading arrangement. So some of them, yes, some of these RTAs, regional trade agreements, have been elaborated as a substitute to a multilateral deal. Others are actually complementing what is already in the multilateral framework. Now, there are also strategic games being pursued within these RTAs, whether in the Asia region, whether across Asia, whether in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, what is called now the Trans-Pacific, and also, as of late, or the revived agenda in the transatlantic agenda between the EU and the United States. Right? So the two parties now, they are talking to each other to try and move forward the trading rules between them. And that has implications for the non-party to those agreements. This is why we keep pushing for a multilateral deal. All of us want a multilateral deal. But at the same time, one has to recognize reality. So it is not the only game in town. When you play the game for 11 years and you don't reach a successful conclusion, then you choose other games. And other games are being played out today. Now, whether at the end of the day they will benefit the multilateral trading system, meaning the global agenda, remains to be seen. But definitely, they are chartering new grounds in terms of rulemaking, whether in terms of the rules now. If you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, there we're talking a lot about the role of state-owned enterprises. So rulemaking in that area is new at the global level, and it's progressing. In the intellectual property rights area, also rules are being developed. Human rights, labor-related issues, environmental issues are being discussed within these regional agreements, and therefore they may pave the way for actually a learning by doing when the time comes for a successful conclusion of a multilateral deal. But as the train, the Doha Development Agenda train stays in the station, other trains move, and hopefully they charter new territory and in rulemaking and give lessons to the multilateral agenda when the time is right. But when the time is right, I don't know when it is. So,
Mr. Zhong, perhaps you'd like to respond to that. In China's, it's obviously there's had a wide variety of bilateral deals struck over the past few years. I mean, do you see that do you believe these may undermine a global trade order, or do you see it as complementary? And how does China's trade policy fit within a worldwide trade architecture?
Particularly, probably I will answer this question with the special scope in Sino-African relationship. For the last few years, the situation, the financial situation of the world really severely affect a lot of part of the world and affect a lot of fields in the trade. But interesting enough that Sino-African relationship or Sino-African trade at the time for the last few years was not really affected. Or actually compared with other part of the world, compared with other trade between Africa and Europe and other countries, Sino-African trade was actually become quite normal, and then China, replacing certain European countries, become the biggest trade partner of Africa. Starting of this century, in 2000, the trade volume between China and Africa is only $10 billion. But last year, the number is $160 billion. It's actually 16 times than 12 years ago. But particularly for the last few years. In 2008, we crossed that $100 billion, the trade volume between China and Africa, and now we reach 160. So this kind of increase between China and Africa in the trade, I think is very encouraging. And also at the same time, by increasing the trade volume between China and Africa, it's some kind of a win-win situation, win-win solution for both sides. And when I talk to quite a number of African countries, with the leaders, with the businessmen, with the diplomats, they are very encouraging to see the increase of the trade between China and Africa. So I think, to judge about the last few years, probably something encouraging happened in this field.